Hello gamers, Agathor here with part 2 of weathering effects in DayZ Experimental 0.49. This time we're going to look at hypothermia. If you haven't seen my hypothermia guide yet, I'd recommend doing so before watching this. In my hypothermia video we looked at how the sun affects our heat comfort value. In this video we're going to look at the 3 other weather effects: wind, altitude and rain. Seeing as there's no way to gauge wind, we can't test it without it being extremely unreliable. What we did test, however, was altitude and rain. Altitude first. I stood on a hill while naked and another player on the same server stood at sea level. We got the same white messages at roughly the same rate. Take note that Chernobyl gains in altitude as you go further northwest, so it's slightly colder in the northwest of the map. Now rain. Rain first of all blocks out the sun with clouds and makes the server much colder as a result, but the worst part is it makes your clothes wet when it starts to rain. There are however many ways to avoid getting wet or drying off in DayZ. The underside of trees and the inside of houses protects you from rain. If you get caught in the rain, you can quickly remove the soaked status by sitting next to a campfire. This does not work with a gas stove, and make sure you do not sit directly on the fire. Any variation of the Gorka jacket found at military loot spawns and the raincoat found at residential loot spawns will stop you from getting wet while it's raining. These two, however, will not stop you from getting wet if you run into a pond. To add to this, different clothing has different amounts of absorbency. In this experiment I test how long it takes to dry off while wearing different gear. With all of my gear it took over an hour, with no gear at all it took just 4 minutes, with just the wool coat on it took 10 minutes, and finally with just the Gorka jacket on it took 4 minutes and a half. These results tell us that for every piece of clothing you wear, your maximum absorbency value increases. Becoming completely soaked results in all of your clothes being fully absorbed with water. Now because we dry off at a set value per second and not a set percentage, jumping in ponds with all of your gear could take well over an hour for your clothes to dry off. Ultimately, taking off your clothes before jumping in a pond or river means you will dry off in just 4 minutes when you get back out and put your clothes back on. Be aware that clothing inside other clothing does not get wet, so you can always store clothing items inside your backpack to cross rivers. Alternatively, added in 0.49, you can now dry your clothes by right clicking on your pants or top. This dries you off fairly quickly and can be repeated until you become fully dry again. As a conclusion to these 3 weather effects, being wet is by far the strongest multiplier for going hypothermic, so staying dry is a good way to keep your body temperature level. If you do manage to get hypothermic, there are 3 stages. Stage 1 starts if your body temperature is below 35.8. This stage currently has no effect. Stage 2 starts below 35 Celsius, again no effect. But the worst and final stage of hypothermia is stage 3, at the body temperature below 34.5 Celsius, drains 10 health and 5 blood per second from you, making hypothermia deadlier than hyperthermia. Realistically, however, all mammals use up energy to create heat for us to stay alive. Well, this applies in DayZ too. If your heat comfort value is below a certain point, you begin to use up energy reserves on your character. There are 5 stages of this energy draining effect. Which stage you're in can be determined by the white messages you get on screen. Stage 1, minus 10 heat comfort value. You will know you're at this value because you will get the "it's chilly out there" messages. This stage removes 0.36 energy per second. Stage 2, minus 15 heat comfort value. Messages include "I feel a bit cold." This drains 0.55 energy per second. Stage 3, minus 20 heat comfort value. Messages include "I feel quite cold." This drains 0.7 energy per second. Stage 4, minus 25 heat comfort value. Messages include "I feel seriously cold." This drains 0.85 energy per second. And finally, stage 5, minus 30 heat comfort value. Messages include "I am freezing." This drains 1.05 energy per second. Now the benefit of this data is roughly calculating your total heat comfort on the fly. If you take off your jacket and get the white message "I feel a bit cold," you should put it back on as you're below -15 heat comfort value and you are currently losing 0.55 energy per second. Here's an example of how I know how much heat comfort value I have. Wearing nothing but a soaked wool coat, I get the messages "I feel a bit cold," meaning I'm between -15 and -20 heat comfort value. This is stage 2. As soon as my soaked status turns into a wet status, my heat comfort value goes down to between -10 and -15. This is stage 1. As soon as my wet status turns into a damp status, I get no messages at all, meaning I'm between -10 and +15 heat comfort value. Between these two values is the perfect heat comfort value to be at for regulating your body temperature. I got all of this information by just looking at the white messages in game. This example also shows us that the different stages of wetness, damp, wet and soaked, have significant differences. To conclude weathering effects in DayZ as a whole, hypothermia and hypothermia are both deadly, and I feel sorry for the players that don't take the time to learn about this very complicated mechanic before 0.9 comes to stable. On the other hand, as stated by developers, the speed at which you gain hypothermia or hypothermia is exaggerated in experimental 0.49 to test the effects of them both before they go live. So when weathering effects do go to stable, I can't imagine us having too much trouble staying at the right temperature. This means getting hyperthermia or hypothermia is reserved for extreme conditions where, say, you're naked, you're soaked, the server temperature is extremely low, and you're lost on the top of a mountain. All in all, most of the time, weathering effects will only increase the rate at which we go hungry or thirsty, making it only slightly harder to survive in DayZ. Thank you for watching, thank you for all of your birthday messages and donations, and I will see you in the next video.